A 14-year-old girl was found inside the front trunk of a car after sitting there for several months. But by the time Celeste Rivas Hernandez reached the autopsy table, her body had been so altered by decomposition that even the most basic answers were no longer easy to find. But despite that, the medical examiner still found what they needed. This was clearly homicide. Critical details seemed to be missing and injuries were distorted, and yet what is still there raises even more disturbing questions. What actually happened to Celeste in her final moments, and how much of the truth was almost lost with her body? The small details in the autopsy report start to form a much bigger picture, and it's one that doesn't match the surface level understanding of this case at all. Now that the report is finally public, it's reopening this case in a way that no one expected. When we break down this together, piece by piece from a nurse's perspective, you're going to see how much this autopsy actually reveals, even when it doesn't look like it. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. If you missed the first video that I did on today's case, I'll be sure to link it because it covers a lot more background than today will. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit of a refresher, but we're going to be focusing heavily on the autopsy from the nursing perspective, as well as some of the legal updates and where things are currently at. With all that being said, let's get into it. Celeste Abigail Rivas Hernandez was born on September 7th, 2010 in Lake Elsinore, California. She was the youngest child of Jesus and Satali Hernandez, and they're immigrants from El Salvador who built their life in Riverside County. She has two older siblings, attended Lakeland Village School as a 7th grader, and she was known to be a sweet and loving young girl. She deserved to live a full life. She was only 14 years old when she died, and her body was found the day after what should have been her 15th birthday. The man charged with her murder is David Anthony Burke, known as D4VD. He is a 21-year-old musician in LA who's known for his ironic hit song, Romantic Homicide. He built his platform on TikTok, and he has nearly 4 million followers. By April 2025, he was on the verge of a major career moment because his debut album called Withered was set to drop, and tickets for his world tour were going on pre-sale. The very same day those tickets went on pre-sale, the prosecutors identified that being the last day that Celeste Rivas Hernandez was alive. Some of this was covered in the first video, but prosecutors allege that Burke first met Celeste in January of 2022 on Discord when she was only 11 years old. He allegedly began an intimate relationship with her in November 2023, and at this point, she was only 13 and he was 18. She had been reported missing by her parents on 3 separate occasions, once on February 15th, again on March 19th, and again on April 5th, 2024. When Riverside County searched through her phone records after the February report, that's when they discovered Burke's phone number. He told law enforcement that he didn't know she was a minor, and she came home 2 days later. Despite being told that she was only 13 by the police, prosecutors allege that he continued to pursue her, going so far as to pay one of her middle school classmates $1,000 to deliver a secret burner phone to Celeste so that the two of them could continue talking to each other without her parents knowing. Throughout 2024, Celeste spent a lot of time with David. She ran away and traveled with him to Las Vegas, London, and Texas, and there were photos of her taken backstage at one of his LA concerts in June of 2024. But even more concerning than that was the texts that were found by investigators during this same time referencing intimacy, pregnancy, terminating said pregnancy, and the use of Plan B, which, if you didn't know, that is an emergency contraceptive. She was only 13 years old having this conversation. The two allegedly broke up in November 2024, but they continued to talk, and according to the prosecutors, they continued to be intimate. By March 2025, Celeste was texting him and said, quote, "All we do is have sex and just hang out, man. I want more than that for myself," end quote. This relationship was also becoming increasingly volatile, and she was threatening to expose what he had been doing to her. On the night of April 22nd, 2025, they got into a really long argument over texts. Celeste was feeling jealous of his other relationships, and prosecutors say that she threatened to disclose their relationship and end his career and destroy his life. The next evening, on April 23rd, 2025, Burke allegedly ordered an Uber to go pick up Celeste from Lake Elsinore and bring her to his rented Hollywood home. This was about a 70-mile trip at around 8:40 that night. 20 minutes after she got there, prosecutors said that Burke started texting her phone asking where she was. Their theory is that he had just killed her and was establishing the start of his alibi. He was trying to make it seem as if she never showed up to his house. That same night, he drove to an isolated area near Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County, and prosecutors believe that he disposed of some of her belongings there. In January 2026, a Caltrans worker found her passport card right off the highway near that lake. Burke allegedly returned to his Hollywood Hills home the morning after her death to do a radio interview as if nothing happened at all. Now remember, he did have a new album to promote. In the days after that, he used the fake name Victoria Mendez to order several interesting items online. First, he ordered a shovel from Home Depot on Postmates, then 2 chainsaws from Amazon, a body bag, some heavy-duty laundry bags, and a blue inflatable pool. When I saw that list of items that he ordered, I felt sick to my stomach because we know the condition that Celeste was found in and how each of these items may have been used. On July 7th, 2025, he ordered a burn cage incinerator, and prosecutors allege that he placed Celeste's body in the inflatable pool inside of his garage to contain the blood. Then he used the chainsaw to dismember her, cut off her left ring and pinky fingers to destroy the tattoo of his name, and then he sealed her remains. He put her head and torso in one bag, arms and legs in another, and then placed them in the front trunk of his Tesla. The Tesla sat parked on Bluebird Avenue in Hollywood, and Burke was last seen driving it on July 29, 2025. Then he left for his Withered World tour, and the car sat baking in the summer heat. Neighbors complained about a foul smell coming from the car, but Burke allegedly had told people that it was coming from dead mice. Do we really think that an odor that strong could be coming from dead mice? Let me know if you would have believed that excuse, because it just seems illogical to me. On September 6, 2025, the Tesla was towed, and 2 days later, a tow yard worker called the LAPD after noticing an interesting smell. Officers opened the front truck and found Celeste's dismembered, heavily decomposed remains, and it took until September 16th for the remains to be identified as Celeste Rivas Hernandez. They confirmed that it was her through her dental records. On April 16, 2026, David Anthony Burke was arrested at a residence on Marmont Avenue in the Hollywood Hills. But before we get into the charges on what's happening now, I'm going to spend some time deep diving into the reason that we're here, and that is the released autopsy. Everything that we're about to talk about comes from the 26-page autopsy report, which was finally unsealed on April 22nd, 2026, so not that long ago. But every clinical interpretation that we're about to go over is my own, drawn from my nursing background and some forensic pathology research that I did as well. I will be clear when I'm interpreting something versus talking about a confirmed finding from the report. The autopsy was performed on September 10th, 2025 by Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. Ansel Nam. The report begins by saying, autopsy examination was limited by extensive postmortem changes. This affects nearly every conclusion that the examiner can draw, and it's an unfortunate way to start this exam when you're looking for clear answers. Celeste's remains were sitting inside of that Tesla for 4 to 5 months, exposed to the warm summer heat in Los Angeles, California. Temperatures inside a sealed vehicle can reach higher than 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer. At those temps, decomposition accelerates rapidly. Skin slippage starts happening, soft tissues start to liquefy, gas builds up from bacterial activity, and the structural integrity of organs breaks down. By the time her remains were found, many findings that would normally be there, like wound track measurements, hemorrhage patterns, bruising, and signs of struggle, were simply gone. Even though this is a very discouraging way to start, the ME still found what he needed to clearly make a homicide determination. So let's talk about what was found. Celeste's remains weighed only 71 pounds at the time of autopsy. A healthy 14-year-old girl typically weighs somewhere between 95 to 130 pounds depending on height and build. 71 pounds for a 14-year-old is concerning. However, this number doesn't reflect what Celeste actually weighed in life. Fluids were lost through the dismemberment as well as tissue, plus additional weight was lost during the tissue breakdown over the course of months in the car. This created even more challenges for the medical examiner because there was less tissue available for sampling and testing too. I just wanted to point out that that number wouldn't reflect her overall health and life because this weight is distorted. I've seen this misreported quite a bit in the media. The report documented that Celeste was wearing a discolored tube top, a shirt, discolored underwear, black leggings, and black socks. The shirt had 3 cut marks in it that seemed to correspond with the stab wounds found beneath them. If the cuts on the shirt align perfectly with the penetrating wounds to the body, which we will get into shortly, then that would confirm that the wounds were inflicted while she was still clothed. Now let's apply that logic to the timeline of when investigators believe that she was attacked. Her clothing having stab marks in them is consistent with a sudden attack, like as soon as Celeste arrived to David's house when he was setting up his alibi and texting her asking where she was. Her leggings were also cut around the knees. The upper portion was still on the torso, and the lower portions were rolled down to both ankles. This is consistent with the leggings sliding or rolling down while the legs were being severed. At the cut sites, the ME also discovered the presence of small blue plastic pieces. Those little blue plastic fragments were found at every cut location on her body. Little pieces of plastic were found on the torso where her arms had been removed, and the leg cut sites as well, and even on her clothes at the major cut points. These blue plastic pieces being embedded into cut surfaces tells us quite a bit of information. When a saw or chainsaw is used to cut through bone and soft tissue, the blade can leave behind microscopic or macroscopic fragments behind in the surface. This is called tool mark evidence. Blue plastic is an easily identifiable color because it doesn't really exist naturally for us. If investigators can match the specific characteristics of these fragments to either a saw or maybe even the pool she was in that Burke allegedly ordered off of Amazon, then that becomes direct physical evidence linking the tool to the crime scene. Those fragments prove that dismemberment involved a tool that at least came in contact with blue plastic components at the scene, which could be consistent with the pool that was ordered on Amazon as well. The autopsy report also mentioned that her head was partially skeletonized and the left eye was missing. This is normal for advanced decomposition and insect activity. The absence of her left eye did not come from a wound. There's been quite a bit of misinformation out there about this one detail online. The eye was not gouged out or removed violently because none of the additional signs on her face were there to support that theory. I can understand why so many have said this, though, given how violent this young girl's death was. There just simply isn't additional evidence to support it other than the decomposition or insect activity. There were some superficial abrasions found on one of Celeste's hands, but the report didn't specify which hand, the exact location, or if they seemed to be defensive in nature. The ME may not have gone into further detail here because of how shallow the skin injuries are in some of these findings, and the skin was breaking down, so it was very difficult to assess. Regardless, though, this was found on her hand, so it was documented. Now remember, Celeste had a tattoo that said "shh" on the inside of her right index finger, which matches the tattoo that David has on his own finger. But on her left hand, the ring and pinky fingers were noticeably missing, and the report specifically states that they appeared to have been mutilated. There is no chance that these specific fingers were missing due to decomposition. This could only have happened through violence. Prosecutors allege that Burke removed those specific fingers because her ring finger had a tattoo of his name on it. If that tattoo was in fact on her ring finger, then it would be direct physical evidence of their relationship, and he wouldn't want anybody to see that. As far as the internal exam goes, the ME identified 2 penetrating wounds to the torso. They described the wounds as having smooth edges that may represent sharp force injuries. In remains that are fresh, doctors can clearly tell the difference between sharp injuries like stab wounds or maybe even a blunt force injury. But after months of decomposing, the tissue changed. Edges can become smoothed out or distorted, so the examiner is just being cautious when they word it in this way. They're saying that the wounds look like they were caused by something sharp, but they can't state it with absolute certainty because of the condition of the body. Even with that wording, though, the overall conclusion is that she was stabbed. The first stab wound was in the right side of the abdomen, and it penetrated the liver. The liver is a highly vascular organ, meaning that it has a large blood supply to it. When it's injured, it can bleed heavily and quickly. A penetrating injury to the liver without immediate medical treatment leads to internal bleeding, then hemorrhaging that can become fatal in a very short amount of time. This is not a survivable injury without quick emergency intervention. The second wound was located on the lower left side of the chest. it penetrated one of the left intercostal spaces, meaning it passed between her ribs into the chest cavity, and the examiner documented, quote, disruption of the adjacent ribs cortical surfaces, end quote. The depth was at least 2 inches. The space that was stabbed contains the lungs, heart, and major blood vessels, and an injury in this location is immediately life-threatening. The disruption of the cortical surfaces of the adjacent ribs means that the weapon struck bone hard enough to damage or chip that hard outer layer of the ribs, and this takes extreme violence and force. The report specifically mentioned that the left lung appeared intact, which is a significant finding that I do want to talk a little bit about. The most immediate concern with a stab wound to the left side of the chest is a pneumothorax. This happens when air enters the pleural space and it collapses the lung. It can also cause what's called a hemothorax, where blood fills up the pleural space, and both of these scenarios are emergent and would require at least a chest tube or some other type of intervention very quickly. The fact that the left lung appeared to be intact doesn't mean that there was no blood in the chest cavity. It just means that the lung itself wasn't pierced. The advanced decomposition could have hidden hemothorax or pneumothorax because those injuries can degrade and not show anything after sitting for months in a car. This is an example of what I meant at the start of the video when I said we needed to read between the lines in this report too. And last but not least, we need to talk about the toxicology report. This has been heavily misreported by the media and even in the true crime space, so I want to dive into this. The results changed between the different screens, so let's talk a little bit about why. When we run a drug screen on a living patient in the hospital, we're looking at the urine or blood from a functioning human body. Postmortem toxicology is very different. For Celeste, her testing was done in 3 phases. During the initial screening or phase, the liver tissue returned presumptive positives for benzodiazepines, amphetamines, and MDMA. A presumptive positive means that the initial screen detected something, but these tests cast a very wide net and they can produce false positives. They are not diagnostic, so further testing is required to know for sure. A second round of testing showed inconclusive results for amphetamines and opioids, and there was also no confirmed presence of MDMA. This is why it's so important to remember that inconclusive or even an initial positive doesn't always mean that it's for sure a positive result. This is true at least for postmortem. The confirmatory assay is more specific and sensitive than the initial screen, and it could not confirm the presence of any of those substances. Now, during the third and final phase of testing, the drug screen did not detect benzodiazepines or MDMA, but the amphetamine result was inconclusive. The report also mentioned that none of these substances were a contributing factor in her death because she had been stabbed to death, so any substances wouldn't have changed the outcome of the situation anyway. The liver tissue did show a low level of ethanol, but the examiner explicitly stated that the origin of that ethanol couldn't be determined, so we don't know if Celeste drank alcohol before death or if the ethanol was actually produced post-mortem, which is normal. Regardless, this is more of an incidental finding. I want to be just as honest with you as the medical examiner was in the report, though, because there are things that this autopsy simply can't tell us. What we do know is this: the cause of death was multiple penetrating injuries, and the manner of death was homicide. They added in the wording absence of other causes because of the decomposition limits in this case, and that also relates to the rumors that Celeste was pregnant when she was killed. I do know that the autopsy was updated recently to state that it's unclear if she was pregnant at the time of murder, which is incredibly disturbing. We may never know if she was due to the nature of her remains, but what we do know is that it was changed to say that it was unclear if she was pregnant. Regardless, though, what happened to Celeste was clear, and that is that her life had been brutally taken at only 14 years old. Now let's get into some of the legal proceedings, charges, and where things are currently at. David Burke was arrested on April 16, 2025. This was about a year, almost to the day, that investigators estimated that Celeste was killed, and he has pleaded not guilty to everything. First-degree murder in California requires proof of premeditation and deliberation, so the murder had to be planned in advance and not impulsive. Prosecutors are alleging that Burke knew about Celeste's threat, so he decided to call an Uber to bring her to his house, killed her within about 20 minutes of arriving, and then he drove to Santa Barbara County that same night to get rid of the evidence. This all required planning. In addition to first-degree murder, prosecutors added 3 special circumstances, and each of them, if proven, would make David Burke eligible for the death penalty or life without parole. The first special circumstance is murder of a witness. Prosecutors allege that at the time of Celeste's death, she was a witness to an ongoing investigation into Burke's misconduct with a minor, with her being both the victim and the witness technically. Burke was already under investigation for lewd and lascivious acts with Celeste because she was under 14, so prosecutors argue that he killed her specifically to silence her as a potential witness against him in that investigation. The second circumstance is murder for financial gain. This is the career preservation motive that I'm sure you've heard talked about quite a bit online. Prosecutors are alleging that Burke killed Celeste because of her threats to expose their relationship and that they would have destroyed his music career. At the time, he had that debut album dropping, a world tour in pre-sale, and brand partnerships at risk to lose. The DA's office feels that David felt her silence was worth more than her life. That meets the legal threshold for murder for financial gain under California law. The third special circumstance is lying in wait, which we've talked about a couple of times in recent cases. Lying in wait means that the defendant hid their intent or purpose and waited for an opportunity to strike. Prosecutors believe that Burke disguised his plan to kill Celeste, called her to come over under false pretenses, then attacked her within just minutes of her getting there. Again, this is exactly what lying in wait is. In addition to the murder charge and special circumstances, there's also a second charge in this case for unlawful conduct with a minor for their extended intimate relationship, and this is completely separate from the murder charge. For this charge to stick, they have to show that it happened at least 3 times over a period of 3 months or more. According to them, there is a ton of digital evidence to back this up, like messages, photos, and data from his devices. This charge alone carries serious prison time, even without the murder, and it sounds like they've got plenty of evidence to support it. There's also another charge added on for unlawful mutilation of human remains, which speaks for itself. The brief filed by Deputy DA Beth Silverman on April 29, 2026, gives us a pretty clear picture of what the prosecutors are planning to use during trial, and it's a 9-page summary, so let's go over a little bit of that now. Over 40 terabytes of discovery were handed over to the defense, meaning that digital evidence and massive amounts of other data were handed over. For some context, 40 terabytes is the equivalent of 20 million pictures. Yes, million. This evidence came from Burke's iPhone, other phones, computers, tablets, and his iCloud account, and data gathered from a court-authorized wiretap. At the April 23rd hearing, Deputy DA Beth Silverman also shared that Burke's iPhone contained a significant amount of material involving minors, including both photos and videos, which is absolutely sickening. Then there's the DNA evidence, which is highly incriminating and just as important. When the LAPD searched Burke's rental house in the Hollywood Hills in September of 2025, they found evidence in the garage that was consistent with human dismemberment. Blood samples were taken from that space, and they matched Celeste's DNA. That places her blood directly inside of his garage, which prosecutors believe is where she was dismembered. They also have GPS and surveillance data because Burke's Tesla tracked where it went, and prosecutors say that the data helps to place him in key locations like Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County the night of April 23rd when he got rid of her ID. It also would have tracked him going back to the same area multiple times in May. So now we have both physical evidence and GPS data potentially putting him in the same place where her belongings were found, plus DNA evidence of her being murdered in his garage. On top of all of that, prosecutors mentioned that they also have that wiretap evidence from legally monitoring some of his conversations. They haven't said exactly what was captured in their tap, but the fact that it led to them finding over 40 terabytes of data tells us the amount of surveillance that they did prior to charging him. Another interesting piece of the investigation is that they called 3 separate grand juries between November 2025 and February 2026. These weren't used to charge him, they were actually used to force people to testify, which can happen when witnesses don't want to cooperate. Grand jury subpoenas are serious, and ignoring them can lead to an arrest. In fact, one of Burke's friends, known as Neo, was reportedly arrested for not showing up. That gives you an idea of what the investigators were dealing with here, just trying to get people in his circle to talk. It doesn't seem like very many people in David Burke's life were willing to speak to them, so they had to assemble a grand jury to get them to speak. As for the defense, Burke's legal team is made up of very experienced, high-profile attorneys, So far, they say that he didn't kill her and he wasn't responsible for her death. But beyond that, they haven't offered any alternative explanations, so they're probably saving them for trial. I can't imagine any logical defense that they could come up with to defend him as their client, given the sheer amount of evidence against him in this case. Their strategy right now seems to be focusing more on procedures, like pushing prosecutors to turn over the evidence quickly, while also arguing that they need more time to review it. They also tried to have a prosecution document sealed saying that this was one sided and could influence potential jurors, but the judge actually denied their request. They haven't addressed some of the biggest pieces of evidence yet, like the DNA in the garage or how her remains ended up in his car. Right now, the case is still in its preliminary hearing stage, which is basically a checkpoint. There have been quite a few delays, but trial is currently scheduled for June 29th, 2026, at the time that I'm recording this video. Celeste's parents, Jesus and Satali, have been present through every development in this case. Satali Hernandez stood outside of the courthouse following Burke's arraignment, and she told reporters that she wanted justice for her daughter and she would not rest until everyone responsible was held accountable. The family decided not to attend the April 23rd hearing, which is the day that the autopsy was released, and they issued a statement through their attorney. He said, quote, "The Rivas Hernandez family is absolutely devastated by the findings contained in the medical examiner's report involving the horrible and gruesome death of their beloved daughter. These findings have caused profound emotional pain for the family," end quote. It's traumatizing no matter what, losing a child, but hearing the details of exactly what happened and how would be far too much for anyone to take. I'm relieved to know that they didn't attend that hearing. Celeste was laid to rest in a funeral held for her on October 7th, 2025 in Lake Elsinore, about a month after her remains were found. The community turned out in large numbers, attended vigils that were held in her honor, and a memorial in her neighborhood still stands that has countless pictures, notes, and flowers there in support of her. She was truly loved by her family and her community, and there has been such an outpouring of compassion ever since the news broke about what happened to her. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was just 11 years old when she encountered a monster on Discord. She was just a child trying to figure out life and growing up, and she never deserved any of this. This case is truly horrifying, and I pray that Celeste is resting peacefully and that justice will be served soon in trial. Thank you so much for listening to essentially a part 2 of Celeste's story, and of course for spending time with me today. I hesitated to do a video yet just because trial is upcoming, but there has been so much misinformation out there about the autopsy specifically, so I decided that I wanted to cover this case and do an updated autopsy video. Thank you, Kira, for the recommendation on doing a follow-up video, and please correct me if I mispronounced your name. Today's video was incredibly heavy, so please go get some fresh air, eat a snack, and just decompress. Take a break from true crime if you need to. I am beyond grateful for each and every one of you, and I can't tell you what it means to me, truly, when I see you guys come back week after week. We really have grown such a tight-knit community, and it truly fills my heart with so much joy. Don't forget to take good care of yourselves this week, nurse's orders, and drop our blue butterfly handshake in the chat. Or not blue, sorry, just butterfly. If you made it this far in today's video. I'll see you next time. Bye.